This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Lo Kui-su. Tonight's top stories. China derides criticism of guilty verdicts for a Hong Kong tycoon under a Beijing-imposed National Security Law as the territory's leader makes his annual visit to the Chinese capital. Manila lodges another diplomatic protest over Chinese Coast Guard action in the South China Sea, rounding off the year with about 50 filings and more than 240 since President Marcos took office in 2022. South Korea pushing for concrete follow-up from the US on the north after the nation's presidents met in October. But talks with Washington taking place amid apparent ministerial disagreement in Seoul. Ideology driving a father and son to kill 15 people in one of Australia's deadliest mass shootings. The Prime Minister says now is the time to come together. And also on this bulletin, Hong Kong's deadliest fire in years, bringing renewed attention to the city's quintessential bamboo scaffolding that the government has vowed to phase out. But defenders of the lightweight material are pushing back. And China hitting back in rare open letters after the US, the UK, the EU and Australia weighed in on Monday's guilty verdict for former Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai. Beijing's foreign ministry armed in Hong Kong urging international media to maintain objectivity, asserting that Hong Kong's judiciary exercises its judicial power free from interference and that courts are professional and impartial. Well, the US president says he has asked China's president to consider releasing Jimmy Lai.
I feel so badly. I spoke to President Xi about it, and I asked to consider his release. He's not well. He's an older man, and he's not well. So I did put that request out. We'll see what happens, okay?
The United Kingdom also calling for his release, the British Foreign Secretary telling Parliament that the Chinese ambassador to the UK had been summoned over Jimmy Lai's conviction. And CNA's Deborah Wong joins us live from Shenzhen. Deborah, what are some of Hong Kong's and the Chinese central government's concerns over coverage by foreign media of these guilty verdicts for Jimmy Lai?
So much of the international press coverage focuses on the declining state of press freedom and judicial injustice in Hong Kong. And so it seems that the comments coming out of Beijing and Hong Kong, the statements are, we can see that they're pretty keen to set the record straight. In fact, Beijing's foreign ministry arm in Hong Kong uploaded 3 letters on their website over the last 2 days. And part of that, they've also included a statement debunking claims of, political injustice here. And first, I want to talk about the open letter to all foreign press that was uploaded sometime yesterday, clarifying key matters of the case. They debunked claims that Lai was convicted due to press freedom, essentially saying that the crux of his criminal charges lay in the fact that he colluded with foreign forces to call for hostile action against China and Hong Kong, essentially endangering national security. And in response to claims of declining press freedom, judicial injustice and inhumane treatment, the letter said that Mr. Lai's trial was actually open to the public. The court proceedings were transparent and allowed members of the public as well as foreign consular officers to attend to observe it, and that he was also given adequate medical attention. Now, this is a pretty rare letter. The press office does not usually upload such letters. In fact, the last time that they did so was really in a form of open letters to specific media debunking certain claims that they've made. In fact, in the last 2 days, they've issued statements to Washington Post as well as Wall Street Journal. And these are pretty strongly worded letters. In fact, for this particular case, they've sent letters to Washport and WSJ saying that the editorial boards had issued statements that reached new heights of absurdity and also describing the articles as melodramatic and a sham.
Meanwhile, President Trump adding his voice to that, calling for the release of Jimmy Lai. Given this, these strongly worded letters, how do you see Beijing likely to respond to that request from President Trump?
So that same office, Beijing's foreign ministry arm in Hong Kong, also released a statement related to that. In fact, when the verdict dropped yesterday on Monday, they say that the case is an internal affair and it brooks no external interference. So the Commissioner's office also described these politicians, because it's not just Mr. Trump. It was also the UK's Foreign Secretary that issued a statement calling for Lai's immediate release. And the Commissioner's office right now saying that these politicians' calls were hypocritical as well as malicious, and saying that they are not going to be intimidated by threats of sanctions. Now, we see similar statements coming out of the Chinese Foreign Ministry after the verdict dropped on Monday, as well as today once again, saying that Hong Kong is governed by the rule of law and that the central government is firmly behind Hong Kong's government to protect national security. Have a listen.
昨天我们已经阐明中方立场，香港是法治社会，中央政府坚定支持特区依法维护国家安全，惩治危害国家安全的犯罪行为。
So it's worth noting, if you've heard just before you came to me in the live report, Trump's remarks. Trump's remarks, in fact, right now seem to be a little bit more subdued. He's calling on Beijing to consider releasing Jimmy Lai, and that is quite different from the rhetoric that he put out in his election campaign, where he insisted that Lai was going to be part of the US-China trade talks, and he was, using very strongly worded statements to demand Lai's release. So it's quite different this time, perhaps softening the tone ahead of his potential visit to Beijing next year. And of course, the APEC is going to be held in Shenzhen next year as well. And we do see him perhaps softening that, stepping that to pave the way for his presence in China. So we'll have to see more in the days ahead. Back to you.
Thanks for that. CNA's Deborah Wong speaking to us there from Shenzhen. Philippine Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro has denounced China's Coast Guard, calling the actions against Filipino fishermen dangerous and inhumane. On Friday, Chinese forces used water cannon against fishing vessels near Sabina Shoal in the South China Sea and cut their anchor lines. 3 fishermen were injured and 2 of the vessels damaged. Mr. Teodoro says the aggressive moves run against the duty of all countries to protect human lives. Manila's ally, the United States, also condemned Chinese actions, saying they undermine regional stability. China yesterday defending its Coast Guard's actions, accusing the Philippines of orchestrating a large number of ships to, quote, create trouble.
非方所谓渔船不顾中方一再劝阻和警告，顽固在鲜滨礁西湖滞留，还多次采取恶意转向等危险举动。 非方人员甚至持刀威胁中方现场维权执法的海警。
Manila and China's claim that the fishermen threatened its Manila says China's claim that the fishermen threatened its Coast Guard was blatant lies. It's urging Beijing to stop spreading disinformation. It sent a formal reprimand to the Chinese embassy in Manila. Friday's run-in, the latest in a series of clashes in these disputed waters. Sabina Shoal lies within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, but China claims close to the entire South China Sea, rejecting an international ruling in 2016 that its claims had no legal basis. Taiwan's military should be able to respond rapidly to any attack from China. And Taiwan's defense ministry says all units can operate under decentralized command and are able to carry out combat missions without direct orders from superiors. Self-ruled Taiwan claims China has intensified military pressure around the island in recent years. Beijing claims Taiwan as part of its territory and has not ruled out using force to bring it back under its control. China also doubling down on Japan as diplomatic relations continue to spiral over Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi's remarks on Taiwan. Chinese envoy to the United Nations repeating Beijing's demand that Ms. Takaichi take back her comments in Parliament. in which she suggested Tokyo may intervene in the event of a Chinese attack on Taiwan.
80年后的今天，我们绝不能允许军国主义死灰复燃，绝不能允许法西斯主义的幽灵复活。中方再次敦促日方撤回错误言论，认真反思悔过，不要在错误的道路上越走越远。
South Korea and the US have held their first high-level talks on North Korea since President Lee Jae-myung took office. But discord between South Korean ministries over those talks could derail President Lee's bid to bring Pyongyang back to the negotiating table. The Foreign Ministry Vice Minister Jong Yong-do welcomed acting US Ambassador Kevin Kim, launching a new consultative channel. Working from last month's E-Trump summit fact sheet, the two sides reaffirmed complete denuclearization, urging Pyongyang to resume dialogue. Notably absent, though, was the Unification Ministry, as normally Seoul's lead on inter-Korean affairs. Minister Chung Dong-young reportedly warning that South Korea's dialogue with the US could undermine its prospects for restoring ties with North Korea. The Foreign Ministry insisting both agencies remain, quote, one team. But the Unification Ministry striking a different note. It says it will hold its own talks with the US on North Korea when that is necessary. Pyongyang, meanwhile, has stayed silent. It last joined serious nuclear talks in 2019 and has since declared itself a permanent nuclear weapons state. In 2020, Pyongyang cut off hotlines with the South and blew up the Inter-Korean Liaison Office. A court in South Korea says it will deliver its verdict next month on whether former President Yoon Suk-yeol had obstructed justice. He is accused of blocking investigators from detaining him over his short-lived imposition of martial law. The sentencing hearing is set on the 16th of January. The former leader also faces other charges, and these include violating cabinet members' rights, tampering with a revised martial law proclamation, and ordering the deletion of secure phone records. Yoon's lawyers have sought to delay verdicts until another bench rules on his insurrection and abuse of power case. But judges rejected the request, saying the case was unrelated. The development comes a day after Special Counsel Cho Yun-suk confirmed that Yoon had led, quote, an elaborate scheme trying to provoke North Korea into a military clash by sending drones to Pyongyang.
비상계엄을 선포할 명분을 만들기 위해 비정상적 군사작전을 통해 북한의 무력 도발을 유인하였으나 북한이 군사적으로 대응하지 않아 실패하였고.
Well, the man nominated to lead South Korea's Broadcast and Media Commission says he's considering a social media ban for teenagers. Kim Jong-cho, speaking at his parliamentary confirmation hearing today, says he views the move as, quote, absolutely necessary, and that restrictions similar to those recently implemented by Australia will be considered to protect underage users from harmful online content. Australia earlier this month became the first country to ban social media for children under the age of 16 over concern for health and safety. A South Korean law taking effect in March will ban the use of mobile phones and smart devices in schools. While in Japan, there's a similar ban in primary schools, although there is an exception for older children, such as junior high students, so that they can make emergency calls. While in China, mobile phones have been banned in primary and secondary schools since 2021, a bid then to improve concentration and stem addiction to the internet. Japan has lifted a warning for a potential megaquake a week after a magnitude 7.6 tremor struck off its northern coast in the Hokkaido Sanriku region. The nation's weather agency is urging continued vigilance, as there is still a heightened risk of a large-scale earthquake along the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench and the Japan Trench. According to government guidelines, a megaquake in the region, where the latest advisory applied, could lead to a tsunami of up to 30 meters high and kill nearly 200,000 people. It could also wipe out an estimated 200,000-plus buildings and cause some $200 billion in economic damage. The 8th December quake injured more than 50 people, and it triggered tsunami waves of up to 70 centimeters. A warning for giant waves was issued for parts of Aomori, Iwate, and Hokkaido prefectures. Thousands were evacuated to safety. Still ahead on East Asia Tonight, a trade deal signed between the UK and South Korea, which cements tariff-free access for the vast majority of goods between the nations, including car components. And later, the world's biggest zinc smelter, that's Korea Zinc, swings from surge to slump in just one day. We have all the details of that dramatic shift. And we're back on East Asia Tonight, and Henry is here with all the business news. Henry, after an anti-dumping investigation, China has decided on its final duties for pork from the European Union.
Yeah, that's right, Wei Su, but they are not as punishing as initially feared. But the timing stings. China's facing oversupply, while European producers are struggling with soft demand and disease outbreaks. And China is imposing anti-dumping duties on EU pork for 5 years. But the new levies are significantly lower than the temporary duties announced in September. They range from around 5% to 20%. That's sharply lower than the preliminary tariffs of up to 62.4%. China launched an anti-dumping probe into shipments from the bloc in June. That was part of a series of countermeasures to Brussels' investigations into Chinese subsidies across a range of industries. And Beijing's probe has affected major pork exporters such as Spain, the Netherlands, and Denmark. Experts say even at lower levels, the duties risk another blow to farmers in Europe, contending with slowing demand and the fallout from disease outbreaks. The UK has finalized a long-awaited free trade agreement with South Korea. This just weeks before an existing lower tariff arrangement was set to expire. Well, the deal, reinforcing post-Brexit trade ties, preserves tariff-free access across 98% of products. It also loosens rules on whether car components can be sourced. And Seoul says the deal strengthens supply chain cooperation and digital trade, helping both countries adapt to a shifting global market. Whitehall says the deal will give a significant boost to British exporters. For the UK, it's the fourth trade deal struck by the Labour government and expected to grow British services exports by around $530 million, offering better access to Korea's financial markets and easing the export of goods, including Banley, Guinness, and Scottish salmon. While reversal of fortunes for Korea Zinc, its shares slumping 14% after surging as much as 26% yesterday. Well, that swing comes as its largest shareholder moves to block a US-backed joint venture that would dilute its stake. Korea Zinc on Monday announced a $7.4 billion mineral shelter project in Tennessee, but its largest shareholder alliance, MBK Partners, and metal smelter Yongpeng is pushing back. Well, the group has filed for an injunction to halt the plan. They say they support building the smelter, but oppose issuing new shares to selected investors to fund it, arguing the move would dilute their combined holdings. Well, the world's largest zinc smelter has been locked in a long-running power struggle among its founding families. Yongpeng and MBK have been trying to wrestle control from current management. And meantime, experts say the U.S. deal makes Korea Zinc a key player in Washington's push to develop new critical mineral supply chains and reduce dependence on China. While shares of South Korean battery maker LG Energy also under pressure, down more than 5.5%, and investors put off by American automaker Ford, saying it's moving away from electric vehicles and focusing on combustion and hybrid cars. Ford is LG Energy's fourth largest customer, accounting for almost 6% of its revenue. And Ford says it will take a $19.5 billion write-down, which would include scrapping its flagship F-150 electric pickup truck and several other large EV models. And Ford's EV business had struggled to make a profit, with CEO Jim Farley saying the decision was made as EVs made no financial sense. But Ford is not fully retreating from the EV market. Its Michigan plant will roll out a new line of smaller and lower-cost EVs from 2027. A move, it says, is to compete with Chinese EV makers such as BYD. Many companies have pulled back in EV investments in the U.S. following President Trump's policy shakeup. Washington has cancelled tax credits for EV purchases and put a freeze on fines that automakers pay for violating fuel economy regulations. And more Chinese economists and former central bank officials are reportedly arguing the country needs a stronger currency to help it rebalance its economy. They say a stronger yuan could reduce China's reliance on exports while boosting domestic consumption. It could also help dial down trade conflicts after it posted a record $1 trillion trade surplus in the first 11 months of the year. The yuan lost 13% against the dollar in 3 years through 2024. Year to date, it strengthened 3.5%. Meanwhile, Chinese equity markets are on the back foot. Investors are digesting lackluster economic data out of China yesterday and growing default risks of property developer Vanke. And Shanghai Composite Index ending today's trading session down more than 1.1%. Washington Opponent Index down more than 1.5%. In Hong Kong, the benchmark Hang Seng Index off by similar margin as well. And one analyst we spoke to says Chinese policymakers are facing a dilemma, which is limiting how far fiscal reforms can go.
They're stuck in a rock and a hard place. Sure, you can reduce your manufacturing reliance, you can reduce your overcapacity, but the cost of reducing your overcapacity is what do you do if you shut down the capacity? Where are the people going to find jobs? And are you going to offer welfare measures to offset that? And that comes with a very hefty bill. So it's not an easy decision. I know a lot of policymakers tend to think that they should reduce their reliance on manufacturing and boost domestic consumption. To some extent, they can do more, for sure, and I completely buy into that. But to create a critical mass of the change requires a massive investment. And right now they have enough buffer to increase their debt. But having said that, it's always a tricky decision. And knowing what we know about Chinese policymakers, they tend to err on the conservative side. So there are solutions for sure. There are tools that they can use better, but there's a limited sort of effectiveness within the room in which we can operate without increasing the fiscal risks.
A smartphone industry tracker says global supply for the devices next year may fall more than 2% as chip makers divert production towards advanced memory for data centers. An independent survey by Counterpart Research also says that smartphone prices might jump almost 7%. That's as prices of components also rise up to a quarter. Tech firms have issued warnings about a memory chip shortage as semiconductor firms prioritize higher-end AI chips over basic models. Counterpoint adds that the chip shortage will be more acute for entry-level smartphone models, with Chinese brands such as Honor and Oppo likely to lose the most due to their thin margins. But analysts say industry heavyweights Apple and Samsung will be able to weather next few quarters. Well, Nasdaq is planning to extend its trading session to 23 hours as the U.S. second-largest exchange looks to capitalize on a booming interest from global investors in U.S. stocks. Nasdaq is seeking approval from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission to add another session from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Singapore-Hong Kong time. The exchange first announced its intention earlier in March and is one of many looking to go round the clock. Rival New York Stock Exchange's proposal for a 22-hour trading session got initial approval from the SEC back in February. And in July, the London Stock Exchange floated the idea of launching 24-hour trades. Extended trading hours gained popularity during the COVID-19 pandemic, with online platforms such as Robinhood and interactive brokers allowing customers to trade American stocks round the clock. Well, the world's richest man just got even richer. Elon Musk is now reportedly the first person to be worth $600 billion, a jump from the $500 billion he was worth in October, according to Forbes. And much of that is due to reports his SpaceX startup is preparing for what could be the largest initial public offering of all time next year. is said to be looking to raise $30 billion. The rocket maker is pushing through with an insider share sale that gives it a valuation of $800 billion, nearly double its valuation in July. It also eclipses the previous record of $500 billion that ChatGPT owner OpenAI set in October, making SpaceX the world's most valuable closely held company. But the valuation also hinges on some ambitious plans that it would need to pull off in the years ahead. Another company boosting Musk's fortunes is Tesla. It closed higher by 3.6% overnight, putting its year-to-date gains at 25%, while still close to an all-time high after pulling back slightly from the one-year peak it reached during the session. Well, the boost came after it said it was testing robotaxis without safety monitors in the front passenger seat. Investors are getting excited over Tesla's self-driving technology and humanoid robot ambitions. But much of its revenue and profit still comes from EV sales. Investors and analysts, though, are expecting Tesla to increase testing and deployment of driverless taxis. Well, that's the latest in business. Wei Su, back to you.
Well, thanks for that, Henry. Still ahead on this bulletin, we look into Sydney's Bondi Beach shooting that Australian police now say was an Islamic State-inspired terrorist attack. This is East Asia Tonight, and these are the headlines. China derides criticism of guilty verdicts for a Hong Kong tycoon under a Beijing-imposed national security law as the territory leader makes his annual visit to the Chinese capital. Manila lodges another diplomatic protest over Chinese Coast Guard action in the South China Sea after water cannon was used against its fishing boats near the contested Sabina Shoal. And the US and South Korea hold their first high-level talks on North Korea amid discord between ministries in Seoul over whether talks with Washington could dampen prospects of restoring ties with Pyongyang. Authorities in Australia say they are treating the mass shooting at Sydney's Bondi Beach as a terror attack inspired by the Islamic State. A father and son targeted a Hanukkah event, leaving 15 people dead. Police revealing the father's identity for the first time as Sajid Akram, aged 50. His son, Naveed Akram, is 24. Authorities also confirmed both men traveled to the Philippines last month.
There has been reports in the news about our two offenders travelling to the Philippines last month. I can confirm that they did travel to the Philippines. The reasons why they went to the Philippines and the purpose of that and where they went when they were there is under investigation at the moment. I also confirm that the vehicle which is registered to the younger male contained IEDs, but I also confirm that it contained 2 homemade ISIS flags.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is calling for national unity, with the shooting seen as targeting the Jewish community.
What Australians want is to come together. What terrorists seek to do is to create division, is to create conflict, is to undermine social cohesion. At that time, we're a better country than that, and we can't allow their objective to be successful. And that is why we must come together as a nation, I think, overwhelmingly.
The Prime Minister also visited Ahmed Al-Ahmed in hospital, the 43-year-old father of 2, charged at one of the gunmen, and seized his rifle. Mr. Albanese praised his courage as inspiring, calling him an Australian hero.
Yeah, somebody got it. Somebody got it. Yeah.
A footage shows him confronting the attacker and disarming him, an act being lauded by many, including the US president. Ahmed was shot several times in the shoulder. New social media footage also surfacing, showing a couple attempting to stop the gunman earlier in the attack. Dashcam video shows them confronting Sajid Akram near a footbridge. Drone footage later confirmed both were killed at the scene. CNA's Jack Bott tells us how the investigation is unfolding and the safety measures that Australian authorities are taking.
Certainly the motivations of the investigation seem to be squarely on why this attack occurred and the types of connections and networks linked to the two individuals involved. We know that these two men travelled to the Philippines just last month, according to anti-terror officials here in Australia. That's been reported by Australian media throughout the day. We know that they travelled to Manila and then somewhere in the southern Philippines. We don't know exactly where. We don't know who they associated with, but you'd have to think that who and what they did while they were in the Philippines. Areas around Mindanao, of course, have been hotbeds for extremist and Islamist groups for several decades now, will be at the top of the agenda for authorities investigating the motivations for what occurred here. We know that the younger attacker, Naveed Akram, did have purported links to Islamic State. That was investigated in 2019. He had some links reportedly to Australia's IS cells. His father, however, despite these investigations, was able to have a gun licence and own several firearms despite the investigations into his own family. So some of these details are now starting to spark national debates, concurrent debates that are occurring now. One is around gun control and the other is around anti-Semitism and hate speech. Australia already has extremely strict gun regulations that were introduced back in the mid-1990s. There are very heavy restrictions on what type of weapons people can own and possess, but of course that hasn't stopped the incident in this case. So the government is already going ahead with new moves to make those rules even stricter. The licensing, what guns people can own, whether only Australian citizens would be able to have guns here in the country, and as well at the same time we're having pressure applied to the government to provide real moral leadership here, to protect the community, to provide support for those who have been left vulnerable in the wake of this attack. And that may come out in the form of more anti-Semitism restrictions and rules. The government says the rules have never been tougher, but they do have plans in place. They've already banned doxing. The Nazi symbol has already been made illegal, so there are steps. But certainly there is pressure and there is emotion from the community to ensure that more is done and that attacks like this don't happen again.
Earlier we spoke to Rod Campbell. He's Research Director at the Australia Institute. He explained how gun numbers have been rising in the country and that laws have not kept up.
I think what's important to understand is that Australia now has more guns now than it did after our big gun law reforms in the late 1990s. Before the terrible Port Arthur massacre in 1996, there were about 3 million guns in Australia. Now there's over 4 million guns in Australia. That number did drop down to about 2.5 million through the late 90s. But in the last decade, we've steadily seen gun numbers increase in Australia. And so I think Australian governments, federal and state, because there's some different responsibilities and jurisdictions, but I think all Australian governments have been complacent about gun laws in Australia, and it's time to strengthen them again. The National Firearms Agreement that was committed to nearly 30 years ago, recommitted to in 2017, it's actually never been completed. There is still no national register of firearms in Australia. If you want to know how many firearms are in your state or maybe in your neighbourhood, if you're looking to move to a part of Australia that you're trying to avoid living near lots of gun owners, that data is just simply not available to you in most of the country. So, yeah, there's a lot of unfinished business, and hopefully that can now be pushed ahead. Look, Australians overwhelmingly support stronger gun laws. Australians overwhelmingly want fewer guns in the community. This has been consistent over time. Owning a gun in Australia is a privilege, not a right, and that's the underlying basis of all of our gun laws. So, no, there is no widespread pushback against this. The support for reducing the number of guns in Australia is absolutely overwhelming. All it needs is government effort and commitment to just get it done.
Tensions between Thailand and Cambodia showing no signs of easing, with Phnom Penh accusing its neighbour of striking deep in its territory. Cambodia says Thai warplanes bombed an area near a displaced civilian camp in Siem Reap province. It's less than a 2-hour drive from the Angkor Wat temple complex. That's a popular tourist attraction. Cambodia says hundreds more displaced families have been forced to flee after Thai F-16s targeted a bridge more than 70 kilometres from the border and far from the current area of dispute. At least 31 people, including soldiers and civilians, have been killed on both sides since the return to clashes more than a week ago. More than 800,000 people have been displaced. Both nations blaming the other for sparking fresh violence, trading accusations of targeting civilians. Bangkok says it has submitted a formal letter to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights over Cambodian attacks allegedly targeting Thai civilians. The move follows Phnom Penh asking the UN Security Council to take urgent action over what it described as a series of unprovoked and escalating armed attacks along their border. Thailand's military says it has stopped fuel shipments passing through a border checkpoint with Laos, owing to fears that they could be diverted to Cambodia. It made clear the move was not intended against the people of Laos. The escalating conflict was expected to be on the agenda for a special ASEAN foreign ministers meeting today, but it has been postponed to next Monday. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, who is also ASEAN chair, says Thailand had asked for this delay. Mr. Anwar appealed again to both sides to stop fighting, saying all have been in contact on a daily basis. Still led on East Asia Tonight, we turn to Thailand, where residents will head, or rather we stay in Thailand, where residents will head to the polls on the 8th of February as tensions with Cambodia, as we just heard, rage on. And crowds flock to Tokyo's Ueno Zoo, where panda fans are hoping to catch a glimpse of the 4-year-old twins set to be sent back to China next month. Voters in Thailand will head to the polls to choose a new government on the 8th of February next year. The earlier than expected election comes after Prime Minister Anutin Chanvirakul dissolved parliament last week. The Election Commission says parties must nominate their candidates for Prime Minister by this year. Advance voting will take place on the 1st of February. 500 seats in the House of Representatives will be up for grabs. Mr. Anutin announced last Thursday that he was, quote, returning power to the people. He has been Prime Minister for barely 3 months and is Thailand's 3rd Premier since 2023. Mr. Anutin came to power a week after former Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra of the Pheu Thai Party was dismissed in August by the Constitutional Court for handling of the border conflict with Cambodia. Mr. Anutin's move to dissolve Parliament for a snap poll reportedly triggered by a fallout with the biggest opposition People's Party, which had threatened a no-confidence vote against Mr. Anutin. The party also accused his Bum Chai Thai party of breaking an agreement reached in September that had provided Anutin with the support to become Prime Minister. The two parties, along with Pheu Thai, are expected to dominate the votes next year. Opinion polls have pointed to the People's Party, that's the opposition party, as the most popular. But support for all three parties is facing a decline. Criticism has been mounting in particular over how the government has responded to deadly floods in the south that have killed more than 260 people. But observers say the Anutin government could stand to gain from a wave of nationalism sweeping through the kingdom as the Thai military fights Cambodian forces. Earlier, my colleague Paul Sung spoke to Michael Montesano. He's coordinator of Thailand Studies Program at the ICC's Sophia Institute. Mr. Montesano looked at what parties are likely to stress in a campaign for votes.
I actually am with you on this point. I actually think that as the campaign moves forward, and again, without predicting the future of this conflict with Cambodia, but I believe that as the campaign moves forward, voters' economic preferences and economic interests may actually prove more important than the issue of nationalism vis-a-vis Cambodia. And I think that that's very much the issue that we should be watching. And seeing how voters react to the various parties' pledges and promises on the economy and the various parties' presumed capacity to address economic woes. So I think your question hits the nail on the head in terms of what we really should be looking at this point, the economy and voters' assessment of parties' role in addressing economic woes.
Now, alongside that, there's also growing scrutiny of the Election Commission and its neutrality. How much trust do you think that Thai voters have in the electoral process, and could this affect the turnout or the perceived legitimacy of the results?
In general, when one speaks to Thai voters in the run-up to elections, they tend to demonstrate immense interest in elections. They view them with great spirit, as topics of interest, as almost as horse races. So I don't think that the legitimacy of the electoral process will really dissuade many voters from participating. I think that a bigger factor is simply disillusionment with politics rather than with the electoral process. The fact that there's been such a chaotic situation for so long, the fact that each of the three parties is really running on old ideas, old promises, running on fumes, essentially. I think that's really the factor that could dampen interest and participation rather than a lack of confidence in the electoral process.
Now, if no party secures a clear mandate, what kind of coalition politics do you expect post-election? Could we see another short-lived government, you think?
I won't predict that the government will be short-lived, but I think coalition formation will be an extremely awkward business because what happened in the past year has led to what can only be called bad blood between Pheu Thai and Phumjai Thai, Prime Minister Anutin's party. And if the People's Party does well, and even if it comes out as the party with the most seats in the House, it's unlikely, A, that it will be allowed by establishment interests to form a government, and B, that it really can even form a coalition. One reason for that is that the People's Party's interest in constitutional amendment will make for very difficult negotiations with prospective coalition parties. What that means is that one thing we need to bear in mind is the strong possibility of attempts to form a coalition between Pheu Thai and Phumjai Thai, despite the awkwardness in their relations that has resulted from the situation in the past year. So this is a very discouraging situation, the whole question of how a government will actually be formed after the February elections. Very discouraging.
Authorities in Hong Kong are probing the role that bamboo scaffolding may have played in a fire last month that killed 160 people in Tai Po district. They're eyeing a shift to metal, but experts warn not to rush to blame a centuries-old tradition. The inquiry expected to take up to 9 months.
Defenders of bamboo in Hong Kong are making their case for the material's continued use. Bamboo scaffolding is a common sight on Hong Kong's towers, though most other parts of Asia have largely switched to metal. Mr. Ho Ping Tak is pushing back, arguing the real issue lies elsewhere and that bamboo's long been a safe and reliable part of the city's skyline.
就算你捉到你一般嗰啲小火咧，或者係未達到嗰個溫度嘅時候咧，佢都唔係話咁容易燒着，佢只係一個可燃物料。 竹並不是係一個易燃物料，佢只係能夠講係可燃物料。如果佢未有達到嗰個高溫嘅溫度嘅情況下，或者未有達到一定嗰個火力嘅情況下咧，佢未必燒得着嘅。大家都知啦，香港嗰個人嘅居住環境咧係全球數一數二，即係太過密集啊！有時真係啲樓與樓之間咧相隔得太近嘅情況下，咁可能有啲環境咧係未必搭得到金屬棚嘅。比如好似而家香港嗰個樓宇嘅設計創意無限，古靈精怪，乜嘢都有。 咁竹咧有一個韌性同埋嗰個時間性都可以配合得到。 但係咧你都知道香港乜嘢都要講速度㗎嘛。咁如果你做金屬棚嘅咧，你睇下喺內地或者係其他地方起樓咧，都冇香港嗰個速度咁快。咁聯繫翻嚟佢嗰個時間同埋嗰個效率，以及呢個金錢上面嗰個建築成本嘅話咧，其實都係有一個優勝之處嘅。
Other proponents add that bamboo is lightweight, inexpensive, and easy to transport. There have been multiple construction site fires and accidents where bamboo scaffolding was present in recent years, but there's no official data showing a sharp increase in bamboo scaffolding fires year by year. Still, in March, a shift to metal had already started when Hong Kong's Development Bureau sent a memo to gradually widen the use of metal. Industry response was mixed, despite the government emphasizing it had no intention to outright ban bamboo scaffolding. The cause of the typo fire is still under investigation, and Hong Kong's Chief Executive John Lee has called for a probe by an independent committee. Meantime, authorities have ordered the removal of all external scaffolding nets from hundreds of buildings undergoing renovation. The materials need to be tested again before they're allowed to be installed.
我哋相信目前嘅成因咧，都係確信咧係應該係當日嗰個嘅係安全網係未達呢個阻燃嘅標準，再加埋咧發泡膠嘅膠板咧係引致到今次嘅大火蔓延得咁嚴重，同埋咧係嗰個發泡膠板令到係玻璃窗爆裂，將啲火係引入去室內嘅。
For now, the bamboo towers are still there, but the future of this scaffolding is uncertain.
Japan is preparing to say goodbye to its last two giant pandas. The announcement that Xiao Xiao and Lei Lei will head to China at the end of January ahead of a deadline for the 20th of February, prompting fans to flock to Tokyo's Ueno Zoo to bid the 4-year-old twins farewell.
はい、やはり、上野動物園で生まれた初めての双子のパンダという意味でそこの部分で非常に、大きな意味があったというふうに思っております、繰り返しになってしまうんですけど、この双子の誕生というのは本当に私たちにいろんな意味で、経験とそれから、感動を与えてくださいました。本当に感謝です。
More crowds are expected ahead of their departure. A final viewing day set for the 25th of January, with viewing time restricted to just 1 minute and online reservations required from next week.
お友達と月に1回会いに来てるんですけれども、今度会えなくなっちゃうので寂しいです。
まあショックですね。はい。ただそれだけです。
どうしてショックですか？
やっぱりその自国でパンダが見れないというふうなショックがやはり大きいですね。
パンダずっと日本にいてほしい、中国のものっていうのは分かってるけれど、日本で生まれたねパンダちゃんなんでずっと上野にいてほしいです。
And that's Tuesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget headlines anytime at cne.asia+. We're on Facebook and YouTube.